Hey folks, Matt Lange here. Today I'm going to be showing you Spaced Out by Baby Audio, which takes the classic concept of a space echo, does that, but then also turns it upside down and is a really creative tool, and it sounds fantastic. So I made a little demo here, and I'm going to be showing you how I use Spaced Out on all the individual parts of this track. Let's check it out. So Spaced Out is on all of that. And first of all, let's take a look at Spaced Out itself. The great thing about this GUI right here, it's very easily resizable. You can make it absolutely massive if you want. So that's great, makes it really easy to look at. And the nice thing is just the layout of this. On the left side, you have your delay, and on the right side, you have your reverb, and in the middle, you have your mixer, and there are multiple ways you can mix between the reverbs and the delays. But starting off, let's take a look first at the delay section. And I'm going to be looking at first, let's take a look at the one I have on my little my noise hi-hat, just because this is a nice, easy way to show off how this works. So first of all, I'm going to disengage the reverb, and it has nice little on-off buttons for each section. That's great. And the mixer, just let's talk about this for just a brief second. It's an XY axis that allows you to really, choose how much of each, not only just the wet and dry of the total thing, but also the mix between the delay and the reverb. So if you go all the way to the left, it'll be all delay. All the way to the right will be all reverb. At the top will be 100% wet. If you go over here, this would be 100% just reverb, give or take. There it is right there. It says 100. And likewise over here with the delay. So I had it about there, but let's take a look first at how this multi-tap delay works. And this is going to be a 16-step sequencer, and it's 16 individual delay lines. So it gives you a lot of creative possibilities. So I'm just going to take this quarter note right here, and I'm going to slowly mix this in. I'm just going to have, let's just do one tap on a 16th note, and there is a little bit of feedback. So that's a dotted eighth note, like 3/16 notes, basically. And it does exactly what you think it would. But what makes this really fun is, say I click on another note right here, so this would be on the 8th note, but I can actually not just have it full velocity, I could then have a lower volume version of it. And this is going to have a different kind of sound. I'll turn off the feedback too. So you can get very creative with this too then, because without the feedback, you could create a pattern that's really quite fascinating. So using that same kind of idea, I'm just going to click in a few different notes, and I really like being able to do the low velocity hits versus the high ones. So really we can get away with this because we don't have any feedback. With feedback, it's going to make it a bit messy. But the other thing I'm going to talk about is sustain, because sustain is, think of sustain as an envelope over the entire course of these 16 steps. So if we have sustain up to 100, it's going to play all of them full velocity. And if we have it down to 0, it's going to be a pretty hard curve. So by the time we get to the end of it, there's not going to be much volume. So let's start here at 100, and then I'll pull it down, and you'll hear how that works. So it's a very handy way of just creating patterns very quickly. Let's even just take a hit with, that's just 1 per bar, just so you can really get the idea. Like, that's great. The dimension, I have this set to ultra wide. There are 3 different options. There is off, so this would just be straight stereo, or I mean, it's not going to affect your stereo image at all. Simple. Ultra wide is going to spread it very far and wide. And then motion is going to give a little bit of panning motion to the hits themselves. So they're all very helpful. I like ultra wide on this one. And then let's also talk about the textures, or really like the delay sounds. I had this on clean. It's a pretty clean delay sound. Wonky tape I really like. This is going to be a little bit more warbly, a little bit warmer sounding. So if we took it on something melodic, let's take, like, say, this guitar hit right here, you actually will start to hear a bit of the pitch fluctuation. So that's nice. And then hazy is going to be even more chorused and a little bit flangey. So that sounds really nice to me. I'm going to get rid of those clicks real quick because they're annoying me, but better. And then lo-fi is going to be a lo-fi bit crushed version of that delay as well. So if we go back to just a hat, works nicely on something like that. And the reverse feature just reverses the taps. So if you hit that, cool, right? And same thing if we put something melodic on it. Let's do it with hazy though, because hazy plus reverse is really quite nice. So it's a really easy way to create some very cool patterns. And it's really quite creative. The nice thing is then also we have this filter right here, and we both have a high pass and a low pass. It's pretty simply designed. So you can really band pass this thing if you want like a band passed filtered delay, which is something I really like the sound of. So that sounds great to me. The other thing let's talk about is up here, which is this is the speed of the sequencer itself. So you could double the tempo of it. So our 16th notes can become 30 seconds. Then we could have dotted eighth notes, I believe, and then triplets, of course. So it gives you lots of options. So for instance, if we went back to that hi-hat and we did it with 30-second notes, it's going to be very almost kind of glitchy sounding. So you can get creative with that, also do like bouncing ball kind of effects. Let's clear out our sequencer, and just by hitting this X. There's also a generate button, which creates a generative pattern, and it's a nice way to get multi-tap hits that, it's random, but it actually can give you some good ideas. So for instance, just hitting that sounds like this. Cool. But let's go back to straight, and I'm just going to go back to creating the little pattern I had before, which was basically an eighth note and a dotted eighth note. And I'm going to add the feedback back in. And I don't need that much feedback, but let's do it about there. That'll work. And maybe we affect the filter just a bit. And maybe we do lo-fi. Cool. So that sounds great on my little hi-hat. Now let's take a look at the reverb. And I'm just going to turn off the delay for now. Here is our reverb section. And we have 4 different types of reverbs, or I should say sizes. We have vacuum, which is the smallest. Then we have a small space, a medium space, and outer space. And obviously outer space is my favorite, because who doesn't like outer space in reverbs? I do. Anyway, within then the reverb, you have 4 different reverb types. So you have cosmic, then you have lush, you have trippy, and alien. And they all sound a bit different from each other. It's a pretty clever way of being able to blur between these reverb types using this XY again. And the further you get out to the perimeter, that's going to be the longer the reverb. And that's the same for every reverb type. So as you get closer to the center, it'll be shorter. Really, really handy. And on this one, let's start here with this cosmic. And if we drag it out longer, if we go to Alien, you can hear there's a flange on that reverb. Let's go into Trippy. There's a more slightly chorused reverb, and then Lush. And that's got a little bit of comb filtering with that noise hat. Let's just put that guitar in there because the guitar sounds nice with it. And let's take Stardust down. We'll talk about that in a second. And Mellow is our filters. And Cleanup is another really great feature. And Width it either collapses to mono or stereo. And Pre-Delay is Pre-Delay. I typically actually don't really like Pre-Delay a lot. So, but you know, if you want to use Pre-Delay, does exactly what you think it will. And then you can, of course, you know, automate the pre-delay and get interesting sounds. So let's go here and let's take this Lush at 100%. So it's as lush as possible and the length is as big as possible. Let's put it in outer space because now it's going to be really nice and long. So you can do some fun stuff just playing with the pre-delay. This is a very long reverb, so you really have to pull it back. Same thing with Lush and Trippy. Let's hear how this one sounds. I'm going to put a little fade on this hit, but a nice long tail. Let's go to Alien with our long flange. And there's Cosmic, that's very chorused. So they all have a bit of modulation, which is nice. And it is a spaced out reverb, of course. So that's great. Stardust is interesting because what Stardust is going to do, and the manual doesn't say exactly what it's doing, that there is a little bit of Stardust magic, so to speak, going on. However, to my ears, basically it extends the upper frequencies. So it boosts some mid-range, some high mid-range, some presence, some treble. And it's a very cool sound. And it really, especially on like a long reverb, makes it very long. So let me show you how this sounds. And with the Stardust, so you can really hear Stardust as this upper ghosty trail in the background. And it's a great sound. And then another nice thing that we have about this is Mellow is filters, similar to Filter over here. It's a high pass and low pass. So we can make some nice bandpassed reverb sounds. And let's try it with the Alien. Cool. That sounds great. And Cleanup is interesting. I really like Cleanup. And what it sounds like to me, it just cleans up that input signal. So it takes out, it looks like it's probably like a filter, a high pass filter or something, but you don't get a lot of like the low mid boom that you might get with a reverb without this feature. So I'm just going to show you what it's like with Cleanup and without. Here's without Cleanup. And here's with. And let's do it on a big reverb where it'll be a little bit more obvious. No Cleanup. Cleanup. It just cleans up some of that low mid-range. So it's a really effective way to really clean up a reverb without going to an EQ after or something like that. So that's super cool. And then let's talk about this mixer section a bit because this has some interesting things going on too. For instance, the ducker. And the ducker is great because it does sidechain, or it just ducks the input whenever another hit happens. So for instance, say I put these 4 snares back to back and I engage the ducker. no ducking. So that's really effective, and it's so nice that's built in and it just works. And the other thing is you can sync the ducker. So if you were doing kind of like a sidechain compression effect like is popular in dance music, this will automatically sync the ducking to quarter notes. So let's just take a pad, for instance, right here, and I'm just going to bring that onto the channel. This one will work right here. And you will hear it doing the ducking every quarter note. So great feature, clever, and it's very useful. You know, saves you the need of having to use another compressor after the fact. So cool. And then lastly, this lift-off button, I believe what it does a little bit of like stereo width, some compression, maybe a bit of EQ. It just makes everything sound a little bit bigger, and it sounds really nice. So I've left it on. There is an output feature, or just an output level if things get a little bit loud, which it can when you do really long reverbs, and I like long reverbs, so it can happen. But anyway, that's a nice feature to have. And then lastly, there's a generate button here that will create a random parameter set for everything. And you can get some really interesting ideas out of that. And it's musical, it's not just totally random. So even if we just threw this, say, on the same pad, and let's hit this 3 times just to see what happens. So it's a nice way to get some interesting ideas, which is sometimes it works, and you know, like anything, you know, with an element of randomness, works sometimes doesn't work as well. But it's a great idea maker. So that all being said, let's go through and I'll show you how I actually used spaced out on all these individual elements. So the first thing, I have it on a kick drum, and I'm using it on the kick drum to actually create the kick pattern. And if we look here at spaced out, this is my pattern of my kick, and I have no feedback, and my sustain is it's still cutting down the volume. It's not full blast by any means, but this is what it sounds like on the kick drum. And that's creating that kick drum pattern. The kick drum itself, as you can see, is just a quarter, or it's just on the first downbeat of every bar. So I created the pattern completely, just doing it in here. And then no dimension, I want it just to be mono, and it's a mono signal anyway. And then I'm using the wonky tape setting just to give it a little bit of character, but it sounds really cool. And there's no reverb going on at all. It's entirely, the way I have it mixed is entirely delay. And now let's talk about the snare underneath it. And that's a nice long delay on that. So once again, same kind of, I wanted to create a pattern with my snare, and I'm using the dimension with motion this time to give it some motion. There is a fair amount of feedback going on here. And so when we hear this snare just soloed, for instance, without the feedback, it would be like this. So I wanted the feedback there to give it that trail. And this time on the reverb, I'm using the small space, and I have it set to cosmic with 68% length. And I'm cutting out a lot of the low end with the mellow here, which is nice because I don't want that low end from the snare. And I'm also then cutting out some of the highs, and I'm using the cleanup feature. I'm doing total width, although we could do mono if we really wanted to. I like the width. And we're adding a bit of Stardust just to give it some like longer trail. And like I demoed before, if we had maximum Stardust, it would sound like this. So it's in that upper presence area. So that's what's going on with that snare. And I just mixed the two modes together just in the little XY axis here, and we're lifting it off. And no ducking because I didn't want to. And then the noise, this, I did this also with creating a pattern in spaced out. So without spaced out, it's that. Let's put the EQ on. With it, so it's cool, it's effective, and yes, it's an eighth note and a dotted eighth, and that's creating this rhythm. And I have it set in the clean mode, and I'm doing the ultra wide dimension. My feedback's at 56, and sustains at 0 because it's just those two hits. Like, there's no reason for a sustain. But then I am using the small space reverb again, and I'm using the Alien this time because I figured it might be fun to have some flanging. And Stardust is maximum because this is a hi-hat and there's lots of high-end, so I just want to add more high-end. And then I really high pass this pretty hard, and like my low cut is at 2588, so almost 2.6 kilohertz. So that's pretty high, and I'm cleaning it up just for the sake of doing it, but I probably didn't need to because there's not a lot going on there in the low end. But those two things together create this hi-hat sound, which really, the spaced out gives it a lot more character. So that's great. And then let's talk about these guitars. Here are the guitars. Without spaced out, they sound like this. Pretty boring, but with spaced out, so it's almost like, the Edge U2 kind of delay style. And I drew in a dotted eighth note, and then I guess 5/16 or 5/16 notes. That would be the second hit. And it's in motion mode, so the delay taps are going to bounce around you a little bit. And once again, wonky tape, because I really like that setting. A fair amount of feedback, and it just sounds really great to me. I did some band passing with the filter. I low passed it at 38 or 3.8K, and there's a little bit of low end cut, and no reverb. This is all just purely delay, and it sounds really nice. It sounds like a nice tape echo on a guitar. So that's awesome. And then likewise I have these kind of swell or guitar swells, so to speak. And once again, spaced out is creating all the character. So here's without spaced out, but with it. Sounds fantastic. It's nearly 100% wet. It may as well be. It says 94. And I'm using both the space section and the echo section. And on the echo section, it's a similar kind of idea that I had before, except now I have actually an eighth note, and then that 5/16 note, and a fair amount of feedback again. I probably copied this from the original pattern and then just affected it, except this time I'm using hazy, because hazy is that more spacey kind of sounding delay sound, which is really cool. And this time around, I'm using a bigger reverb. I'm in the medium space, and I am using the lush mode, and it's at 50% length, give or take, Stardust, and a lot of quite a bit of filtering too, where I took everything out underneath 467, and I'm also cutting anything above 4.5, give or take. So, and then the cleanup is on, and maximum width, and it sounds fantastic. And I did the same exact thing basically with this variation here. The taps are a little bit different. Actually, no, it's not the same thing at all. I'm sorry. But it's a similar idea where I'm using a delay tap and space. And this time I just did a straight quarter note. And you can just do a straight quarter note delay just by clicking in the 5/16 note. So I guess it's, the sixth one would be 5/16. This one is the fifth one. It's the first quarter note, so to speak. And it sounds great. And nice long space. All that. But the delay itself is pretty short. Relatively to the super long reverb. So that sounds great. And then I have this pad, and this came from a little Arturia Micro Freak synthesizer. And here And you can hear that has a really long tail on it too. So this is the pad on its own. Sounds beautiful. I will say the one thing I had before Spaced Out was also a Baby Audio Super VHS, just to give a little bit of drift to that synth and a little bit of heat just to warm it up a little bit. But so much of the character is coming from Spaced Out, where if we bypass it, sounds great, but this is just a whole new dimension. Absolutely beautiful. So once again, I'm using both the echo and the space side of it, and similar pattern to where I did before, where I have an eighth note and then the 5/16ths, and then this time I'm in outer space reverb, and so it's nice and big, and my space is, I guess I'm in the lush mode. And once again, all the stardust, I want all that high-end stardust, and no filtering at all on the filter, and all the cleanup and all the width. I just want this thing to be super wide, super lush, and I'm in liftoff mode just to spread it out even further. And the last thing I have going on in this track is a little vocal, and it's just a vocal cut. So here it is soloed with Spaced Out. Telling you. So it's just a quarter note, and it's that same thing. I just dropped in a little quarter right there. I'm using the hazy mode because I like that warbliness, and I'm doing a lot of feedback, a fair amount of filtering, as you can see, and sustain is all the way up, but just because I wanted a really strong quarter note tap, but there aren't any other taps. And then in my space, I have a nice big reverb again, outer space, and I'm in the trippy section, and I'm mixed 100% wet because I have it on Ascend, and I just have slightly more delay dialed in than the reverb itself, and no ducking or anything like that. It's on Ascend. It sounds great, but especially for like vocal cuts, when you have like little reverb sections, like a nice spaced out reverb always sounds really nice on something like that. Especially when you have some modulation on that reverb and modulation on the delay itself. And the great thing is the hazy mode on the delay is very warbly, and then there's lots of reverb or lots of modulation in the space mode as well. So all together, they sound fantastic. And so that is how I'm using this thing. It's a really fantastic sounding delay. And I'm just gonna play this track from start to finish again, and we will hear Spaced Out on basically everything. So that's Spaced Out by Baby Audio. It's a fantastic plugin, and it's kind of mind-blowing to me that it's only $69 considering how much it does. I mean, it really is almost two individual plugins once you factor in the echo mode as well as the space mode, and they both sound fantastic. It's really creative. It's actually a quite inspiring tool, and that's kind of my favorite thing when I'm going towards an effects plugin is like, is this going to inspire me? And Spaced Out by Baby Audio really does. So it's a steal to buy, and it sounds fantastic, and you should absolutely check it out. It'll definitely inspire you as well.